I think it's quite a significant development, this, from Priti Patel, saying we ought to look again at taxpayer funding. I think it runs to about £50 million a year for the UNHCR, which is actively involved, it seems to me, in seeking to thwart the democratic wishes of the British electorate when it comes to immigration policy.
It is, but I think we've got to be very careful, Colin, not to conflate issues. I think there's a real case to be made that we should exit the European Convention of Human Rights and cut back funding to UNHCR. But that actually has very little to do with the Rwanda plan, which was utterly mad right from the beginning. And even if the ECHR hadn't intervened at the last second to prevent the plane from taking off, it would have only taken off with one or two deportees on it. In fact, the ECHR saved the taxpayer £400,000, I think, for that one flight, with the government having already paid, of course, $120 million to Rwanda. Now, the point about the Rwandan plan, and it's terrific that the government can now throw mud around and blame the ECHR and blame UNHCR. The problem with the Rwanda plan is that it was completely mad in the first place. It was never going to work. Anyone who gave it half a degree of scrutiny would have realized it was going to be fraught with legal challenges. It was extremely expensive. And that's before you even get any deportees to Rwanda and then have to face all the feedback of all the traumas and everything else that they inevitably would have experienced once they got there.
Ben Habib, it wasn't for want of trying or policies from this government. I mean, they looked into things like pushback and jet skis going to meet these little boats halfway out. The lawyers looked at it, said, forget it. First person who drowns, you'll have Border Force officials up in the courts on manslaughter charges. The French won't play ball. If they do play ball for a while, the complexion of the government changes there, it all falls apart. The only way we can take care of this ourselves is by outsourcing it to a third party.
No, the greatest of respect, I completely agree the French are the problem here. But with the greatest of respect, it's the French we need to challenge. Look, think of the optics of this. They're coming across in their dinghies until they enter British waters. At that point, we pick them up. We're actually giving them a taxi service from the point of entry to British waters all the way to the coast. How is that consistent with a policy like Rwanda, which is designed apparently to deter them from coming across the channel?
If you don't pick them up in international waters, you're in breach of international maritime law on rescuing people at sea in distress. That's the problem.
No, but they're not in distress, Colin, are they?
They are when they throw themselves off the dinghy.
They've chosen to make that journey. What we've got to do two things. We've got to challenge the French very forcefully, and we've got to be prepared to man our borders much more aggressively. And unless we're prepared to do that, if we're going to give these people lifts in RNLI boats, give them lifts in Border Force boats, have Border Force unions, I know you were talking about unions before I came on, have Border Force unions challenging the government in the courts to prevent the Rwandan policy. If you're going to have all that sort of behavior, of course you're not going to deter these illegal migrants from coming across. We've got to develop a bit of stiff upper lip, and we've got to take the fight back to the French. And actually, it means chucking them a tow line and British ships taking these dinghies back into French waters and making them go back to France.